Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We are continuing with Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter number 15. And today we will do verse number 10 and 11. Ukramantam sthitam vapi bhunjanam vagunavitam vimudhananupashyanti pashyanti jnana chakshushaha. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. So once again, thank you all so much for joining. And we are continuing with a very interesting chapter number 15, wherein today's verse number 10, some very strong information is being given by Krishna to Arjuna. In this, Hare Krishna itself. So in this verse, we can understand there is a formula given about permanent happiness. You know, a very simple process is given how one can be permanently happy. A very important word in this Sanskrit shloka is ukramantam, which means quitting the body. A very important word. Why? Because quitting the body means at the time of death. And that is actually the final examination for us, which means if we are not prepared for the final examination, then while quitting the body, we will not think about Krishna, and then we will not be able to go back to the spiritual world where there is permanent happiness. The material world only can give us temporary happiness, which has a beginning and an end. But in the spiritual world, it's permanent happiness. So this verse, Krishna is explaining to us what should we look out for if we are looking for permanent happiness. He talks about foolish people, which means vimudha. Vimudha means foolish. Foolish in the sense, someone who doesn't have spiritual knowledge. Okay, so if someone doesn't have spiritual knowledge, then one will not be able to pass the final examination, will not be able to remember Krishna at the time of death, which means it'll be a waste of human form of life. In the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, we learned where Krishna talks about 4 kinds of people who surrender unto him and 4 kinds who do not. So the ones who do not, there are 4 of them. And what does he say? Namam dushkritino mudha. Dushkritino means miscreant. Mudha means foolish. So he says there are 4 kinds, and one of them is a foolish person who does not surrender, someone who is not preparing for liberation or for the final examination. Why? Because they are blinded by unending attempts to enjoy the senses. See, unending attempts just to enjoy the senses. That is what their goal of life is, unfortunately. So what happens when they are struggling in those attempts to enjoy, that they are doing under the spell of 3 modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And they are identifying their happiness with the senses, with the body, which means they are interested only in material happiness. because they have no idea about permanent happiness. They don't have knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita. Their intense desire is how to, get pleasure from the body, how to get mental pleasure also, like mind is also engaged. There is no knowledge, no goal, there is no idea, they absolutely clueless. That is the mode of ignorance. But what is the cure for ignorance? Very simple. Krishna is speaking the Bhagavad Gita for us so that we can enlighten ourselves and remove this ignorance. Now, Krishna says in this verse, those whose eyes are trained in knowledge, which means by hearing the Bhagavad Gita, they are able to see clearly. In other words, they are wearing glasses of the scriptures. So they are seeing through the scriptures, and that is how they get the correct, right knowledge. And that is how they understand this human form of life is very rare and it should not be wasted for temporary happiness. Instead, one should utilize this human form of life to gain this spiritual knowledge, to become self-realized and go back to the spiritual world. You see, why waste this human form of life? It is said that if one loses the health, it can be regained. One who loses money, it can be earned back. But someone who loses time can never get it back. You see, we started the class at 7:30 and now it's 7:36. That means the 6 minutes that have just passed by, we cannot get them back. They are gone. So time can never be, gotten back. But someone who is trained in knowledge, you see, that person can see clearly, which means that person will make good use of this valuable time using this rare human form of life, which means that person will become self-realized and can see the truth. So Bhagavad Gita actually in all the chapters is teaching us how to become self-realized, how not to remain foolish. Now, foolish doesn't mean someone who doesn't have any academic knowledge or material knowledge. No, foolish is someone who has this rare human form but is not utilizing it for self-realization. You see, academic pursuits cannot give us permanent happiness. They only can give us temporary happiness. You see, we fortunately, all of us who are there in this Zoom class, we all are very fortunate that we have a treasure house, which is the Bhagavad Gita. And that Bhagavad Gita is like, a touchstone, which can help us to get permanent happiness. But most people are not interested. So it is important to, as Krishna says, we should use Jnana Chakshu. Jnana means knowledge, Chakshu means vision, the eyes. So with the eyes of knowledge, because without knowledge, we cannot understand, we cannot become self-realized. So if we want to go beyond the bodily concept of life, then we need to have Jnana Chakshu, which means we should see through the eyes of scriptures, through the eyes of this spiritual knowledge. Otherwise, we will remain in this bodily concept and will not be able to break the cycle of birth and death. So the big question is, okay, now that we know Bhagavad Gita can help us to get permanent happiness, but how do we go about it? It's not that difficult. It's simple. First of all, we need to become free of illusion. What is the illusion? Illusion is I am this body. Illusion is I am never going to die. Illusion is I am very happy, etc., etc. So we need to get rid of this illusion and also get rid of false association. Then we will be able to follow the process given to us in the Bhagavad Gita, because with the help of knowledge from Bhagavad Gita, We will understand the difference between body and soul. And we will also understand what is the ultimate goal of life. You see, because to be able to become happy permanently, or to be able to enjoy permanently, we would need to read the Bhagavad Gita, hear the Bhagavad Gita, and understand the Bhagavad Gita. Now, it's easy to hear and read, but it's very difficult to understand unless we have a spiritual teacher who can teach us the Bhagavad Gita. And that means most important part is to hear from bona fide authority, which means those teachers who are coming down in the strict disciplic succession all the way from Krishna. That is how we will be able to understand. And that is how we can train ourselves. That is how we can, get more and more knowledge and put it into application. See, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschit yatati siddhe. You see, out of thousands, only one will try for perfection. Only one will try to become self-realized out of thousands. So we are those few fortunate who are showing interest in self-realization, who, are understanding from the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna is situated in everyone's heart as the super soul. He's the one who knows all our desires. He's the one who can see, who can hear us. He's the witness of all our activities. And he also is aware of our deep desires. Now, if we have the desire to understand him, if we have the desire to understand Bhagavad Gita, then Krishna will fulfill that desire. During the times of COVID, when COVID hit, we saw many people lose their lives because of COVID. And we don't know in what circumstances were they quitting their body, what was the state of consciousness. Even now, even though there is not much COVID around, still we see people leaving their bodies, but in what consciousness? What are they thinking at the time of death, final examination? You see, just I think last week I came to know, in fact, it was last Wednesday, my immediate neighbor, just the next door neighbor, she died, she left her body. Now, a few days before that, someone from the subdivision informed me that Anne was really very sick, and she was about to leave her body. She was that sick. So I wanted to go to her house and help her, and, help her think about the Supreme Lord, help her chant the holy name so that she doesn't have to come back again into this material world. But unfortunately, when I went to the main door, there was a big sign which said no visitors. And of course, then after a few days, last Wednesday, she passed away. And I went to the funeral on Friday. And then after the funeral, we were invited to come to her house. And so when I went there, I inquired from her very close friend, whom I had seen many times with her, that I wanted to come and help her, come and see her. He said, no, she was in so much pain that she didn't want to be bothered. She didn't want to meet anybody. She did not want any help. She basically didn't want to be bothered and just left alone. You see, we don't know in what condition she left her body. You see, it's very, very important now that we have this human form, that we train ourselves, that we can remember Krishna at the time of death. And that is possible only and only if we practice every day. If we do the mantra meditation every day, if we chant every day for as long as we are able to, that will help us, change our consciousness and make it into Krishna consciousness, which means at the time of death, because we've been practicing throughout our life, At the moment of death, we will remember Krishna and go to a place where there is permanent happiness. You see, otherwise we will be back in the cycle of birth and death, and based on our actions, the next body is going to be decided, and it will also be decided how much we will enjoy and how much we are going to suffer. And that we learned about karma in chapter 3 and 5 of Bhagavad Gita, about, how karma is there, but it is changeable. You see, if we are not careful, if we do not take on the knowledge, do not put it into practice, there might be a disaster at the time of death. We may waste our human form of life. Now, from the Mahabharata, we have heard that there were the Kauravas and then the Pandavas. And the father of the Kauravas was Dhritarashtra. Now, Dhritarashtra was materially blind. You see, he couldn't do anything about it because based on his past karma, this body that he had received was without any vision. He was blind. But he chose to be spiritually blind. Even though he was given spiritual knowledge, he did not want to take it. Why? Out of choice. He was very greedy. He wanted the kingdom for his sons, 100 sons. So, that is the reason that he was unable to, make his human form of life successful. You see, spiritually blind also. So if one starts engaging only for the pleasure of the body and not really trying to get some spiritual knowledge and, understand the purpose of human form of life. So otherwise, it'll just be eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Just these 4 activities, maybe in a sophisticated way. But the animals also do the same activities. They eat, they sleep, they have babies, and they defend themselves. But we human beings, we have philosophical intelligence so that we can use that intelligence and become self-realized. Now, only spiritual knowledge can help us in understanding the difference between body and soul. Then we'll be able to understand how this, transmigration takes place, how there are changes in the body itself while we are in this particular body. So if one takes up this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, then one starts becoming conscious of Krishna, and then liberation is not difficult. So if we can somehow or the other become more serious in Bhagavad Gita, then we'll be able to achieve the ultimate goal, which is to go to the spiritual world where there is permanent happiness, and that is the process. Now, in the next verse, number 11, Krishna says, the endeavoring transcendentalists who are situated in self-realization can see all this clearly. But those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try. You see, they are endeavoring. What kinds of endeavoring? Prayers, efforts, patience, everything, then finally come to the stage of self-realization. Once they come there, then they can see clearly. See, when a person is able to see clearly the actual knowledge, which is, I am not this body, but I am the spirit soul. When a person is able to wear the glasses of scriptures and see through the scriptures, then they will be able to understand what is a simple process for permanent happiness. So it's called Jnana Chakshu. Jnana means knowledge. Chakshu means eyes, to see through the eyes of knowledge. Now, if a person's mind is not developed, which means a person is not yet self-realized, is unaware and does not know what is going on. Sometimes we meet people who don't know what life is all about, who are unable to solve their problems, or get rid of their miseries. They're trying and trying and trying to be happy, but are still unsuccessful, you see. So here Krishna is saying we find many transcendentalists. There are different paths, but only if a person is self-realized, then that person would have purified the consciousness and understand his or her true identity. You see, most people don't know, why is this body changing? Why am I transmigrating from one body to another? It's because they are unaware of their relationship with the Supreme Lord Krishna. They are unaware of their own eternal position, which is the eternal servant of Krishna. Now, in chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is called Dhyana Yoga, in that, Krishna doesn't just talk about how to sit properly, how to breathe, how to perform yoga. No, he talks about the real yoga. Yoga means connection, to connect with him, to connect with the Supreme Lord. So he tells Arjuna, yogi nam api sarvesha madgateranta atmana, that the topmost yogi is one who's always thinking of me within his heart. And that is possible only if one is able to chant the holy names of the Lord. That is the connection. Actually, this Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. This Maha Mantra is actually a telephone number that we dial to connect with Krishna. That is the connection. That is real yoga. Yoga for the body is good for the body, but doing mantra meditation is good for the soul. It's good for the mind. It's good for the senses. So, and it is above all good for the consciousness because it purifies the consciousness. So here Krishna is talking about endeavoring transcendentalists, which means those yogis who are endeavoring, but are not yet situated in self-realization. See, so to be able to understand all this, it's important to have a spiritual teacher, someone who can explain to us, who can train us, who can guide us on this path to self-realization. See, it is not sufficient to just speak about the Bhagavad Gita, it's not using flowery words to impress somebody. No, it's important to understand Bhagavad Gita and put it into practice. With the help of the Bhagavad Gita, one can become purified and also self-realized. So the basic knowledge that Krishna is giving in these two verses to us is that the final examination is a very important time. That is the time of death, because that is what is going to decide, based on our consciousness, it's going to decide which body do we get next. In Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a very nice pastime about Bharat Maharaj. Bharat Maharaj, he was the king, emperor of the entire planet Earth at that time, in those days, in Vedic times. And he was very opulent. He had everything you could ask for: good health, beauty, name, power, money, everything he had. He also had knowledge, spiritual knowledge. In spite of having all these opulences, one day he decided to give up everything. He decided to go to the forest and just do mantra meditation, just chant the holy names, remember Krishna, and go back to the spiritual world, because he understood that the simple process for permanent happiness is in the spiritual world. Guess what happened? He went to the forest, and unfortunately, he got attracted to a deer, a baby deer. And he got so involved in taking care of that deer that he forgot all his spiritual activities. He forgot, chanting, he forgot reading, hearing, everything he forgot. His whole focus was on taking care of this baby deer. And guess what happened? He became deer conscious. His whole consciousness was about deer. Did my baby deer eat? Did the baby deer sleep? Did the baby deer play? And this is what was going on day after day after day. One day it so happened that the baby deer left him and was gone. Now, this Bharat Maharaj, this emperor of the entire planet, became morose, was missing the deer, started looking for deer here, there, shouting out, dear, my dear, oh, my beloved dear. And in the process, it was his final examination time. It was the time of death for him. And guess what? He died thinking about the deer, and in the next life, he got the body of a deer. This is what Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajatante kalevaram. Whatever we are thinking at the time of death, whatever state of being we are in at the time of death, Krishna says to that state you will attain without fail. He's giving a guarantee. So we have to be very careful that we lead this rare human form of life in such a way that we are able to remember Krishna at the time of death. And that is possible only when we practice it on a daily basis. Practice what? A simple process, which is mantra meditation. And this simple process will help us to go back to the spiritual world where there is permanent happiness. There is no permanent happiness in this material world. Krishna has made it very clear. Dukhalayam ashashvatam, that there is misery in this material world and it is temporary. And the happiness in the material world has a beginning and it has an end. As soon as our happiness ends, it brings about misery. We are sad because our happiness is no longer there. So a simple process to be permanent happy is to practice bhakti yoga. And bhakti yoga begins with chanting the holy names of the Lord. Excuse me, all of us are aware about the holy name of the Lord. So I will just chant for a few times so that we can, make it a habit to chant every day, at least 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever time we are able to squeeze out. As I said, time lost can never be regained back. So we should make sure we don't waste this human form of life. We don't waste the time, the eternal time, which is very, very valuable. So please chant with me for a few times the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, okay? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. You see, it's a very, very simple method that can help us to become permanently happy. So I'm going to stop now. If anyone has any questions or comments.